Hello everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we will dive into how to leverage AppWrite with Flutter. AppWrite is an open source backend server designed to simplify building secure and scalable applications. It offers a wide range of backend APIs, making it easier for developers to build mobile and also web applications. AppWrite offers core functionalities such as the authentication for users sign in and sign up using various methods. It also offers a databases for storing and also querying structured data. It has a storage for managing project files and also messaging for sending push notifications, emails, and also SMS, as well as support for functions to enhance app functionality. Yeah, so for a quick start over here, you can see it supports web app and also mobile and native, right? So you can use these frameworks and connect with your app, right, as a backend. And with the native platform, we have the React Native and Flutter. We have Apple and Android, right? So I'll go with Flutter in here. And starting with Flutter, first of all, you need to have your Flutter project created, right? Using Flutter create, then you give the name of your project. So once you have the Flutter app created, you need to create a project on the AppWrite console, right? So you need to head over to the AppWrite console and create a new project. If this is your first time, you need to sign up, right? I already have one project created, so I'll create a new one for this tutorial. So over here, you need to give the project a name, which is going to be Flutter AppWrite. Over here, I want the project ID to be automatically generated, so I'll hit the next button, and you can proceed with the default one selected over here. And there we go, we have our project created. Yeah, so these are the products the AppWrite offers. You have the authentication, the database, the functions, the messaging, and also the storage over here. And getting started over here, you need to choose the platform, which is going to be Flutter in our case over here. So we need to specify the name, which is going to be my Flutter app. You can go with any name, right? And also the package name. So if you're wondering where to get this package name, so in your Flutter project, go within your Android directory. We have the build or Gradle file. The namespace, you can see com.example.flutterAppWrite. And that's the package name, right? So you paste that in. So this is setting up the platform for Android, right? So you proceed. So we need to install the AppWrite dependency as well, right? So you need to proceed with the next button. And over here, we can just build the app and go to the dashboard. There it goes. Over here, you have successfully created the platform for the Android, right? So let's proceed to add the platform for the iOS as well. So I'll add a platform, and it's going to be a Flutter app. And I'm going to choose the iOS and need to give the name of the iOS, which is going to be my Flutter app, same as the Android. And the bundle ID is going to be the same, com.example.flutterAppWrite. Then you can proceed to hit the next button, and that's it, right? So we've added iOS and Android to our platforms over here. Yeah, so once we have successful creation of our project on the AppWrite console, let's proceed with the documentation. So we've already have our Flutter project created. We've also created a project on the AppWrite console, right? So the next step is to install the AppWrite using Flutter pub add. So I'll grab the command in here, and within my Flutter project, I'll pop up the terminal and paste in the command Flutter pub add AppWrite. So to get the latest version, you can get rid of this version and Flutter pub add AppWrite, and I'll get you the latest version of the AppWrite. There we go, we have successful installation of the AppWrite. The next step is to find your project ID in the settings page. Okay, and so this is the console, and below over here you have the settings page. So over here you can get access to your project ID and also the endpoint, right? So this is the main method, and before running the main app, make sure you have a client initialized. So I'll grab this sample code snippet and make sure that before running the main app, you should have everything initialized and configured, right? So we need to import the AppWrite to fix the error, right? So we have our clients initialized, passing in the endpoint which correspond to the endpoint we have at the console, right? So this is the endpoint, and we need to pass in the project ID. So I'll grab the project ID over here and need to pass in the project ID. Once you have that, you can save in the changes. Yeah, so our first thing to do is to work with authentication, where we have the user to sign up and also log in to a page, right? Yeah, so over here, to sign up a user or log in a user, you need to get the user's email, password, and also the name, right? So I'll grab these three controllers, and within my home page, I'll paste in, So over here, I'll paste in the controllers where you'll be accepting the email, the password, and also the name, right? And we also need the state of login user, right? Which is going to be of type the user. So let's check whether the user is logged in or not. So let's fix this error, right? So we can import these models from the AppWrite/AppWrite models.dat, and this is going to be as AppWrite, as models. There we go, we have the error fixed. And below over here is the three methods for logging the user in, registering the user, and also logging the user out, right? So I will copy that methods in here. And below the controllers, I'll paste in the methods, right? So we have the login method, the register method, and also the logout method. We are trying to access the account which is not available, right? It's found at the top over here. So we can pass the account to the my app. So you can pass the account to my app, and we need to require that in the constructor of my app, right? So I'll just remove the const over here and add a name parameter. So I'll get rid of this account, and it's going to be required this.account. So below over here, I'll be creating the variable to hold the account. So my app now has access to the account, which you can also pass down to the home page as well. And within this home page, you can pass in the account, and finally pass down to the constructor of my home page, which is going to be required this.account. So once you have that, you can create a variable to hold the account variable. Yeah, so if you don't like this approach, you can just bring in your account where you need the account, which in our case is going to be a home page. So you need not to pass down to my app, then later on pass down to my home page, right? So you can just have access to the account in the home page over here. That's also another alternative. So these are the three methods with authentication: logging the user in, registering the user, and also logging the user out, right? So when we are logging the user in, we get the user's email and also the password, right? Where we make use of the account variable then, which has a method of create email password session. And this create email password session requires the email and also the password, right? So once we have successful creation of the user over here, we can get a user using widget.account.getUser. Then we can update the state of the logged in user by setting a state and assigning the user to the logged in user. So we can have the logged in user over here. And in registering the user, we also use widget.account.create. So it takes in a unique ID to identify each user being registered, and also the email over here and the password and the name, which is optional as well. So this is the method in registering a user, right? So account.create, then you need to pass in the ID, right? So id.unique is coming from the AppWrite, which uniquely creates an ID for each user. Then you pass in the email and password and the name as well. So once we have successful creation of the user or registering of the user, we can log the user in by passing in the email and password. And the last functionality is to log out the user, where we delete the session passing the current. So once we pass in the current, it will get us the current user. Then we can update the state of the logged in user to be null. Yeah, that's basically it. So let's proceed to build out the home page over here. Yeah, so over here, I'll grab this snippet of code. Then in my project, I'll paste that as the body over here. Yep. And I think that's it. All is set. You can run your project with Flutter running, select a browser. Yeah. So basically within the body, we are having a column, and this column is having 3 text fields: one for accepting the user's email, the user's password, and the user's name. And below that, we have a row where we have 3 buttons: one for logging the user in, one for registering the user, and the last one is used for logging the user out, right? So that's basically it, and calling the appropriate method up accordingly. So let's run and test the app and see how it looks like. There we go. So you have 3 text fields that accept the user's email, password, and also the name, right? So you can see the status of the user at the top over there that says not logged in, right? So let's start by creating or registering a user. So over here, I'll enter my email and password and proceed with it. And proceed with the name as well and register a user. So I'm expecting the status of the user to change, right? So once I click on the register button, you can see logged in as Dakwa, right? So we have a user logged in, so we can log the user out and the status will change as well as not logged in. So since we have a user in the database, we can also log the user in as well, right? So let's refresh our console. And at the auth session, you can see the newly created user with the information as well, right? So that's basically it for the AppWrite authentication. We focus on working with AppWrite databases. You learn how to set up a database in AppWrite, interact with it from your Flutter app. We also perform CRUD operations such as creating tags, reading tags, and also updating tags and deleting tags as well. So let's get started. We already have our account initialized, which we make use of that in registering the user, logging the user in, and logging the user out, right? So let's proceed to initialize our database. So over here, we initialize our database. So below the account, we're going to have our databases, which is coming from the AppWrite, and it's going to be databases. Then we initialize that passing the client. So we pass our database down to my app over here, and we need to require that in the constructor of my app widget, right? So just as we did for the account, the same thing will be done over here. So we need to require this databases. So another way to go about this is to create a separate class where you can initialize everything and bring in over here. So once my app has access to the database, you can also pass down to the home page as well, right? So the home page is going to take in the databases, and we also need to do something similar or same thing in the home page by passing down in the constructor. So once we have that, we can finally create our database instance over here. So we now have our database. So let's move on to our console and create our database. So before we do that, let's add 2 more controllers to this text editing controller. So we are going to take in the title over here, and we are also going to take in the description. There you go. So let's create our database. So on your console, the database session, you hit create database, then you proceed to give the name of the database. So I'm going to name it as the tax DB and hit on the create. So it will automatically be assigned an ID over here, and let's proceed to create a collection. And I'm going to have a tax collection. So I'm going to name this as a tax collection. I'm going to leave the collection ID as default, which will be automatically generated for me, as you can see over here. There we go. So we've now created a database. So I like to create a file in the lib directory, and it's going to be a .dat file. So I'm going to name this file as the app config, which is going to hold our configurations of Yeah, so I'll be creating a class of app config, and within this app config, we are going to set up our tax DB. So started const string, then the name is going to be database ID, right? So we need the database ID. So we need to assign this database ID a value, right, which we will get out from the console. So back to the console, we can access the database ID right here. So I'll copy that and place it in a string. We also need the database collection ID. So I'll create a variable of database collection ID. So I need to get that from the console as well. So you move into your tax collection and you can grab the ID over here and replace it. There you go. Since we are within our app config, let's proceed to also set up the project ID as well, right? So I'm going to have our project ID, and within the main of that file, we can get our project ID over here, and we can just replace it with our project ID. So once we have this configuration, we can save in the changes, and where we are setting the project ID, we can access that from the app config. Then we can access the project ID just like this. There we go. So let's proceed over here. The next step is to proceed to create an attribute for this task collection, how we want our data to be structured. So the first one is going to be a string, and the attribute key is going to be the title. You are going to take in the title, and the size is going to be 20. And you can hit on create button. The next one is also going to be a string as well, and the attribute key is going to be the description, and the size, let's increase it to 30 and create this attribute. And lastly, the last one is going to be a boolean, which is going to indicate whether the task is completed or not, right? So the attribute key is going to be completed, and the default value is going to be false. So you can hit on create. There we go. So this is how we want to structure our data. So once we have that structured, let's proceed over here. So we need to do one more thing. So within our task collection, under the settings, let's set our permissions. So we need to add a role. So for now, you let anybody to have access to create, read, update, and also delete. So let's update that. There we go. So back to the code. Within our home page below over here, I'm going to create a variable of tags, which is going to hold our various tags. So it's going to be of type a list of documents, right? And initially assign it an empty array. So let's import that from the AppWrite models.dat. So once we have that over here, let's proceed to create our tags. So let's create a functionality. So we are going to have a function, and the return type is going to be a boolean, where we are going to have the function name to be create tags. So this create tags takes in the title and the description, which they are all going to be of type string. So within the create tags over here, we are going to expect a title and a string, right? So over here, we are going to use try catch, and in our try block, so in creating a new task, we first of all create a variable of final new task, which we can await and call our database, which in our case is going to be widget.databases. Then we can create a document. So in creating of a document, it takes in the database ID, the collection ID, the document ID, and also the data, right? So let's do that. So in taking the database ID, we can access the database ID from the app config.database ID, right? And also the collection ID is going to be app config.database collection ID. So with the document ID, that's going to be uniquely generated, right? So we can use the id.unique to generate an ID for this new tags, and that's going to be id.unique. And finally, we need to pass down the data, right? So the data is going to be an object, which is going to take in the title and the description, where we can pass in the title and the description. So lastly, so it also takes in the completed. So this structure should be similar to how you structured in a database from our console, AppWrite console. And finally, we can set states and update our tags by adding the new tags. Then we can handle the exception. So I'm going to handle on AppWrite exception. Then we can catch any error we get over here by printing the error and later on return false, since the return type is a boolean. So we can return true over here. So basically, in creating the tags, we take in the title and the description, and we create a new tags using our database.create document, where we need to pass in the database ID, collection ID, and also the document ID. So the document ID is uniquely created over here. Then finally, we need to pass in our data. So that's basically it. Yeah, so over here, the next step is to get the list of tags we've created, and for that, I'll be copying that and paste in and make some few modifications, right? So the function name is going to be get tags, which is not going to take in any parameter. So I'll get rid of these parameters, and the return type is going to be a boolean, and we are going to have a response in getting tags, right? So it's going to be await widget.databases.list documents. So in listing of documents over here, we take in the collection ID, the database ID, and that's it, right? So we can finally return the response dot list document. Response dot document, and that's it. So the return type of this is going to be a list of documents, right? So we need to change that from a boolean to a list of documents, right? So in getting the tags, we're going to have a list of tags we've created, and that's going to come in the form of a list of documents. So we need to modify that. There you go. And if you have any exception, we can just return an empty array. So that's it for getting the tags. So we list the documents, passing our database ID and also the collection ID. So let's move on to the next functionality, which is updating a particular tags, right? So in updating a particular tags, the return type is going to be a boolean, and the function name is going to change to be update tags, which is going to require the tags ID and the particular field we are going to update, right? So in our case, we are only going to update the completed field in our case, right? So we take in the tags ID and completed, which comes as a boolean, and we are going to create a variable, rename this variable to be the updated tags, and we await databases.update document, right? So in updating a document, we need to pass in the database ID and also the collection ID and the document ID, that particular document we want to update, and pass that. So once we have that, we can pass in the data and the field we want to update, which is going to be the completed field. So you can add the additional field in your case. So over here, let's make sure we know that particular tags we want to update, and for that I'll be creating an index and loop through to check for the tags we want to update if it's equal to the tags ID being passed in. And once we get our index, we make a check if our index is not equal to -1, which means we really have our tags in here, so we can update our tags and pass in the index with the updated tags. So once we have that, we can finally return a true for updating of that tags, and if you have any exception, you can return false. So the last functionality is to delete a particular tags over here, and in deleting a tags, we need to pass in the tags ID, right? And the return type of this is going to be a boolean, right? And the function name is going to change to delete tags. So in deletion of tags, we need to pass in the tags ID, which comes as a string, and we can just remove the response variable over here and simply await and delete documents, right? So in deletion of the documents, we need to pass in the database ID and the collection ID, then the document ID, which is that particular document we want to delete. Then we can finally return true, and if any exception happens, we can return false for that case. Yeah, so those are the functionalities for creating a task, getting a task, updating a task, and finally deletion of task. So the next step is to work with the UI. So at the top over here, within our init state, let's initially fetch the tags once the app runs for the first time, and for that I'll be creating a function in the init state that will fetch our tags over here. So below over here I'll be creating a function that will fetch our tags, and it's going to be of type a feature of void, and the function name is going to be fetch tags. So in fetching of tags, we simply call our get tags function and assign it to the tags over here. So our tags is going to be awaiting, then we call our function that will get us the tags, and finally we can set the state, and this will load our tags we've created into our tags variable. So once we have this, we can proceed to work on the UI aspect and other functionality. So let's do that. Yeah, so let's proceed with the UI over here. So below the row, are going to have a sizable for spacing, and are going to change in here to height of 24. So below the size box, we are going to have a center, and the child of the center is going to be a test widget that's going to display the test, the database operations. So let's proceed to start this test, right? So with a test style, we can change in the font size over here, and you need to change the font size to be 20. I think that should be it for it. And below the center widget over here, let's return an expanded widget, right? And the child of this expanded widget is going to be based on the tags collection, right? We check if our tags is not empty. So if our tags is empty, we are going to return a center widget with a text that displays no tags. So that will be displaying no tags yet, and if our tags is not empty, we are going to display our various tags, and for that we are going to use listView.builder. And this listView.builder takes in the item builder, and the item builder is a function that takes in the context and the index over here. Oops. So it takes in the context and the index, and we can return something, right? So the listView.builder also takes in the item count, and that's going to be based on our tags length, right? There are various tags, and that's going to be tags.length. And in our item builder over here, we can extract our individual tags, right? So I'll create a variable to hold our tags based on the index. And below that, we are going to return dismissible that takes in the key and the child, right? So this dismissible, the key is going to be holding the key where we can pass in our tags.id, right? So the key in here needs to be unique. So the reason why we are returning dismissible is because we want to add the delete functionality where we will know that particular tags we want to delete, right? So the child of this dismissible is going to be the checkbox list style that takes in the value. So the value in here will be based on whether our tags is completed, right? So we are going to render tags.data.completed. That comes as a boolean, right? So the value expected boolean. So initially it's going to be false, and we have onChange over here. So within this onChange, it takes in the value, and in this value we can update our tags, right? So once the person choose to set the completed to maybe false or true, we can update that. So we check if our value is not equal to null, we can call our function update tags, and we need to pass in the tags ID and the value. There you go, just like this. And there are a few more things to do, right? We need to display the title and the descriptions as well, right? So with the checkbox list style, we can pass in the title where we can pass in the data.title, right? Data, then tags.data, then we can pass in the title field. And we also have the subtitle that comes below the title. So, and for this subtitle, we are going to pass in the tags, do something similar by passing the descriptions over here as well. And I think that's basically it. So basically we are looping through the tags and check if it's not empty. We display the various tags over here. And in displaying the various tags, so with a dismissible, it takes in the undismiss, right? That's a function where we can call our delete tags function. So in deletion of tags, we need to pass in the tags ID and can have access to the tags ID over here. And let's set a background to this dismissible, and it's going to return a container. It's going to return a container, and the color of this container is going to be a red, and the child of this container is going to be an icon as well, right? So let's also set an alignment over here to be at the center, right? And also the child of this container is going to be an icon, and in here the icon name is going to be the delete icon, which is going to be icon into brackets icons.delete, and we proceed to give the color of the icon, which is going to be colors.white. And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so we check through our tags. If it's empty, we display this. If it's not empty, we display our various tags over here, and we are going to return a checkbox list style, display our title and description, pass in our value, and when we want to change the tags, we call the update tags method, right? So the last functionality is to add a particular tag, and for that we are going to place that in the floating action button, right? So I'll pass in the floating action button that takes in the unpressed and also the child, right? So the child of this floating action button is going to be a button, the add button, right? So it's going to be icons.add. So everything is minimalistic over here. You can build complex thing with this, right? So just for demonstration sake, so the unpressed of this floating action button is going to show a dialog, right? So and for that, we are going to use the show dialog method that takes in the context and also the builder. And the builder in here is a function that takes in the context and return something, right? So in showing a dialog, we are going to return the alert dialog, right? So in here, we are going to return the alert dialog. Oops, the copilot is disturbing me over here. So we return the alert dialog and we show the title in here. The title is going to basically be our tags, and also we pass in the content. So we are going to return a column in here, and we're going to have a children, and in this children, first of all, we set the main as its element to be supposed to be main as its size dot min. Yeah. And the children of the column, we're going to have two text fields, right? So the first text field, we pass in a controller, and the controller in here is going to be our title controller, and we also pass in some decoration displaying the label text, right? So input decoration then is going to hold our title. So I'll copy that and repeat this text field one more time, and changing the controller over here to be the description controller, and the label text to be the description. So the alert dialog also comes with the actions where we can place buttons, right? So our first button is going to be a text button, right? It comes with the unpressed and the child, and the child of this first text button is going to be a text of cancel. That's when you want to cancel all these operations. So in canceling, we just pop off the dialog by using navigator.pop, passing the context over here. And I think that should be it. And we also need one more text button over here. So this text button will be responsible for adding a text, right? So the text is going to change to be add, and the functionality in here, which is found within the unpressed, we'll be calling our create text function, right? So before we do that, let's make a check to know that if our title controller and also description controller is not empty. So we check our title controller text if it's not empty. At the same time, we also check if our description controller text is not empty. Then we can proceed to create a text passing in the various values. Then we can pop off the context. And I think that's basically it. That's the functionality in these CRUD operations, and all we need to do is run the app and test. Yeah, so this is it. Let's proceed to create a tag. So in here, expect the title to be passing. So I'll pass in first tags and also the description over here, which is going to be description here. And we can click on add. And there we go. We have our tags. And when we refresh our AppWrite console, we can see our newly created tags over here where they set to before. So let's try and update the completed field and refresh the console and see. And there we go. We have our update functionality working. So let's add another tags and try to delete a particular tags as well, right? So in addition, the title over here is going to be another tags. And there we go. We have another tags. And when we refresh our AppWrite console, we see our document is added, right? So we can delete that particular tags as well. So that's it. Creation of tags work, updating of tags also work, deletion of tags. See you in our next tutorial. Our tutorial, we're going to be using AppWrite messaging to send push notifications. And AppWrite messaging helps you communicate with your users through push notifications, email, and also SMS text messages. So you can see in here that there are 3 types of messages you can send with AppWrite messaging, it being push notifications, email, and also SMS text messages. So in this tutorial, we focus on how you can send a push notification. So with push notification, you can send, schedule, and manage push notification in your app using AppWrite messaging. And the very first step in here is to add a provider. And push notifications might be sent through a third-party providers like the Apple Push Notification Service and also the Firebase Cloud Messaging. And remember, the push notification APIs for Apple and Android devices can only be accessed through these services. So I'll go with Firebase Cloud Messaging in here. So Firebase Cloud Messaging lets you send push notifications to your iOS, Android, and web apps through AppWrite messaging. And before you can deliver messages, we must first of all connect to a messaging provider. And that's the very first thing to do in here. So in your AppWrite console, click on the messaging tab. And at the top section here, you can see the providers. You click on that, choose the push notification, and create a new provider. Give the name of the provider, and choose Firebase Cloud Messaging or FCM as a provider in here. So in here, we need to set up a credential below to enable FCM for sending notification, right? So we can get this JSON file in our Firebase console. So let's proceed to do that and upload it over here. So in your Firebase console, you create a new project and you give the project a name. So I'm going to name this project as AppWrite Messaging. You can go with any name. So I'll name it as AppWrite Messaging. Then I'll click on continue over here. So I'll disable the analytics in here and create a project. There you go. So once we have our project created, you can see our dashboard. So the next thing to do is head over to the project settings over here and verify if our cloud messaging is enabled. And you can see it's enabled already. So under the service account, we need to create or generate a new private key over here. So I'll generate a key. So this key comes in a JSON format, as you can see over here. So in your AppWrite console, you choose a file, and that file is going to be the newly created JSON format. And you open that file. Then you can proceed to create the provider in here. There you go. So we have successfully created our provider in here. So let's verify. So under the messaging providers, you can see the newly created provider. That's the FCM over here. Let's proceed. So over here, the next step is to configure the app, which we've already done that by enabling the FCM and also generating a new private key. So we've done that, and the third step is to configure the app. And in configuring the app, you can go with Android with FCM and also iOS with FCM. So iOS with FCM, you need to be enrolled in the Apple developer account, and with Android with FCM, it's free. You can start with free trial. And that's it. So configuring the app is basically adding iOS and Android to your Firebase project, which we can use Flutterfire to achieve that. So let's move ahead and do that. So in my Flutter project, I'll bring in my terminal over here and run the command Flutterfire configure, right? So make sure you have Flutterfire installed, and this will fetch the available Firebase projects, and I'll choose in the AppWrite messaging in here. So the platform is going to be Android and iOS, and I'll proceed from here. And this will add the necessary files and dependencies, right? There we go. We have our iOS and Android added to Firebase project, and so you can set up your Flutterfire with by searching Flutterfire on Google and choose the first link. So with the documentation, you need to add the Firebase core and also use that pub global activate Flutterfire CLI to activate the Flutterfire CLI. Then you can run the Flutterfire configure command. So let's proceed to add a Firebase core to get rid of the errors. And in here, the command is flutterpub add Firebase underscore core. So we need to add Firebase core to the project. There you go. You can see the error is fixed. So over here, let's initialize our Firebase app. So let's make the main function asynchronous, and below over here we can await and initialize our Firebase app. So it's going to be firebase.initialize. So let's import our Firebase core, firebase.initialize app, and we need to pass in the options in here, which is going to be the default Firebase options.current platform. So default Firebase options.current platform. There we go. So we have that. And also let's verify from here if we have our app being added to the project we just created. So in here I will just refresh the console. There you go. You can see two apps are being added. That's the Android and also the iOS version in here. We are true. Let's proceed. We've done configuring the app by adding the necessary files. The next thing is to test the provider, right? So let's hit on send push notification. And we've added the provider by choosing the FCM. The next step is to add a target. And before sending your first push notification, your application must register itself for push notification, then provide the device token to the AppWrite. So I'll go with FCM for Android in here. And before you can send push notification with FCM, make sure you will allow the steps to add the Firebase to your Android project. We've already done that. And after adding Firebase to your Android project, in our case it's a Flutter project, we initialize our Firebase in our main activity. We've done that. We've initialized our Firebase in our main app. So the example here is written in Kotlin. So I'll try my best to bring that to the Flutter, right? So we need to use the Firebase messaging to get the token in here. And over here, we check AppWrite push target associated with account. Typically, you need to create a push target when the user logs in, right? So when we check for the functionality where we are logging in, then we can create a push target, right? And passing in the token. So let's try and do something like that. So within our Flutter project in here, I'll pop up the terminal and install the Firebase messaging, right? So the command is flutterpub add Firebase messaging. So this package will help us get the FCM token of that particular device. And we've already initialized our app. So let's try and get the FCM token and pass it down, right? So we've done that over here. We've initialized our Firebase, and where we are logging in, let's try and get the FCM token. So below over here, I'll create a variable of FCM token. Then we can await Firebase messaging .instance.getToken. And for this, we get the token in here. So once we have access to the token, we can create a push target per the documentation, and that's going to be widget.account.create push target. So in here, taking the target ID and the identifier. So the target ID over here. So creating a push target, we are going to uniquely create the target ID. So with the identifier, it's going to be the FCM token, right? So we need to pass in the FCM token as the identifier. And with the target ID we can uniquely create a new one once we create the push target for the first time. And the last option is the provider ID, right? Which is optional. We can just pass in the provider ID in here. So we can pass in the provider ID. We can have access to the provider ID on the console. So in our console over here, you can get access to this provider ID. And I'll place that in the app configuration, and I'll be adding one more. That's going to be the provider ID. And in here, I need to replace the provider ID to be appconfig.provider ID. So that's how we can access the provider ID in here. Yeah, I think that's it. We get a token and try and create a push target where we pass in the target ID and the identifier, which is the FCM token. Then we need to pass in the provider ID as well. So we are expecting to be having a new. So when I check this user under the targets, we only have one target, that's the email, right? So once we decide to log in, we are going to have additional targets, and the type is going to be a push one, right? So let me first of all delete this user. Yeah, so in here I've run the app, and let's try and register a new user. So the status of the user is not logged in, so I'll try and register a new user with email, password, and a name. And the email is going to be codewith@gmail.com, and in here I'll pass in a password and also provide a name. So I click on register, and when you register a user by creating a new user, we also proceed to log in the user, where we can create a push target over here. So you can see we are logged in as Dakwa, and let's verify from here. We can see our newly created user. So when we check the targets of this user, you can see a new target is added as the FCM provider in here, and that will allow us to send a push notification. So we can check the messaging tabs, and before we do that, I'll be creating a new file over here and name this file as the notification service, where we have our notification functionality. So in here, I wouldn't be going through this. I'll link the GitHub repo in the description, right? So this notification service use Firebase messaging and local notification in initializing the notification service. So I'll link the GitHub repo in the description. So we initialize our notification service, and within our main.dat file, you can also initialize our notification service in here as well. So it's going to be notification service dot initialize notifications, right? So you're saving that changes, and you can see the initialize notification is found within this notification class, where we try with our Firebase messaging on background. We handle the background messaging and also make use of our local notifications. So make sure you have that installed as well, where you configure the Android and the iOS. So it's pretty much the basic settings in notification. So once we have that initialized, we can go ahead and try and send our first notification. So I'll try and delete this user. So let me delete this user and start everything. So let's create a new user, right? So I'm going to go with the same email, which is codewith@gmail.com. I'll pass in my password over here. Then finally, I'll pass in my name and register this user. So this will proceed and log the user in as well. As you can see, logged in as Dakwa. So once the user is logged in, we also create a push target for that user. So you can see the push target is being created over here. So you can go to the messaging section and create a new message where we select a push notification. So in here we need to give the message title and also the actual message as well. So the actual message goes here. You can also add a media as well. So in here we select a target. You can select topics or target. So I'll go in targets in here and select this user and add that. So you can schedule notification as well on also send instant notification. So you can see in here I've sent a notification. There we go. You can see notification title and also the message in there. So that's basically it. Let's try one more with the example, right? So let's create a new message, select push notification, pass in a title and also pass in a message in here. So once we have that, we can click on the next button and select a target where we can see our user and add that. Then we can send an instant notification in here and voila, we can see a notification. Yeah, and that's basically it. See you in our next tutorial. Today we're going to take a look at AppWrite storage, right? How you can create our first bucket, upload and also download our files. So the first step in here is to create a bucket. So you need to visit our storage and create a new bucket. So in my AppWrite console, you search for the storage and need to create a bucket. So the name of the bucket in here is going to be profiles. That's going to take in our profiles. So I hit on the create button. Yeah, so you can see an ID is automatically assigned to the profiles. And the next step in here, we need to navigate to the settings and give some permissions, right? By setting it to be create and read. So on the settings page, the permissions over here, we can allow anybody to have access to create and also read any information. So we can update that. And down over here, you can choose the extensions of the file. So we are going to accept JPG and also PNG in here and update that as well. Yeah, so the next step is to create a file, right? So to do that, we first of all need to initialize our storage, passing the client, then we make use of our storage to create a new file. So let's do that. So within my Flutter project over here, I will bring in my storage, which is from AppWrite. Then we need to pass that and pass in the client. So once we have our storage, we can pass down to my app and record that in the constructor of my app as well. Then below over here, we can create our storage. So my app has access to the storage right now, so you can pass down to my home. There we go. So we're going to do something similar by also requiring that in the constructor of home page. Yep, so the next step in here is to pick an image or upload an image, and to do that we need to make use of one of these popular package. That's the image picker, right? So I'll install the image picker with the command flutter add image picker, and I'll install my image picker. So once you have successful installation over here, I'll be creating a variable that will hold our image path. That's going to be string, which can be null. And down over here, I'm going to create a function where we can make use of it to pick an image, right? So the function name is going to be future, and the return type is going to be an X file. Then the function name is going to be pick image. So in picking the image, you need to take in the image source. So I'll pass the image source to the function as a parameter. So in our function, we are going to create a variable picker and create an instance of the image picker. Then we can make use of the picker to pick the image and pass in the source. So we can finally return our picked file, which come in the form of the X file. Yeah, so the next function is to upload the image in here. So I'll be creating a function that is going to return a boolean, and the function name is going to be upload image. So it's going to be an asynchronous function, and in this function I'll be creating a file where we call the function to pick the image. So initially I'll assign the image source to be a gallery, then check for the file if it's not equal to null. So if the file is equal to null, we can throw an exception. You can throw an exception in here that's no file selected. So in here, we're going to have try catch where we await and call our storage, right? So widget.storage.create file. So in creating a file, it requires the bucket ID, the file ID, and the actual file. So with the bucket ID, when you check our console, the profile bucket we created, you can have access to the ID. And within my app config over here, I will be passing the bucket ID over here as part of my configuration. So the name in here is going to be storage bucket ID. So we can pass the bucket ID over here as app config the storage bucket ID, and we need to pass in the file ID, which we are going to create it uniquely, right, using the id.unique, and also the file. So with the file, it's going to be input file.from path. Then we can pass in the file path just like this and saving the changes. So once we've created our file, we can also handle the exception over here with AppWrite exception. Then we can print the message and return false for that case. And below over here, we can update our image path by setting a state and assigning the file path to the image path variable we created earlier. And finally, we can return true for successful creation or uploading of a file in here. So this is a functionality in uploading the image. We pick an image and pass in the source to be a gallery. So we can just get rid of this null check since we know that we are actually going to have this file. We make use of the storage and create a file and pass in the ID of that bucket, and also uniquely create an ID for the file ID and pass in the file path and update the image path in here. So where are you going to implement this functionality? It's going to be found within the app bar, right? The actions, and the actions place the widget at the very end of the app bar. So in the app bar, we are going to have an icon button. We have the on press and also the icon. So the icon, we are going to return a circle avatar. And the child of this circle avatar is going to be the person icon, right? So we can pass an icons dot person. And also the press of this button is going to show a modal sheet to choose the source of the image, right? So with the show modal sheet function, it takes in the context and also a builder. And the builder in here takes in the context where we can return our widget. And we are going to return the column widget, and in this column, we are going to set the main access size of this column to be main access size dot minimum here. And in the children of this column, we're going to have two list styles, right? And the first list style is going to take a leading. The leading is going to display an icon, and the icon name in here is going to be the camera icon. We're also going to have a title of this list style, and the title is going to be take a photo. Then finally, we can have on top to this file where we can actually call our function to pick the image and also pop off the modal sheet, right? So I'll be repeating one more list style and changing the leading over here to be the photo album. That's when you decide to choose from your gallery, and also changing the title in here as well. So the title is going to be changed to gallery as well, and yeah, the image source is going to be gallery. So we can actually assign the results of picking the image to a file variable in here. Then we can call our upload image function. You can just get rid of this function, and also within the gallery we can also call our upload image function over here. Yeah, and that's basically it. And also we want to show the image over here, so we are going to base on the image path and check if that's not equal to null. I'm going to render the actual image. If it's null, we are going to render the icon. So let's change the condition over here to be if the image path is equal to null, we are going to render the person icon, else we are going to return the clip over widget, which we can pass in the image.file, then pass in the file, then we can pass in our image path. So this file is actually coming from the .io import, so make sure we have that imported. So we're going to import the .io, and this .io is going to be as IO, so we can differentiate it from the one coming from the AppWrite. And over here we are going to use io.file. There we go, you can see the error is gone. So let's pass some width and height to this clip over. We are going to pass a width of 50, a height of 50, and also set a fit to be box fit dot cover. Yeah, so I think we have our functionality done. All we need to do here is to run and test the app. So basically, in uploading the image, we initially set the source to be a gallery and make use of the storage to create a file, passing the bucket ID, the file ID, and also the file path. Then we show a button sheet to choose between the image source and pass the function accordingly, right? So that's basically it over here. Let's run and test the app. Yeah, so I'll bring in my emulator in here and run it. There we go. So over here you can see our small avatar with a person icon. So when you click on that, you can see you can choose to upload an image. So I'll go and choose this image, and there we go, we can see it's reflected. So let's check our console and see if we indeed have the image in here. So when you refresh the console, you can see our image, which comes in the form of JPEG. Yeah, and that's basically it. Let's conclude our AppWrite tutorial by exploring AppWrite functions. So AppWrite functions are user-defined functions that can start small and scale big, deploying automatically from a source control. This function can be triggered by an HTTP request, SDK methods, server events, webhooks, and also scheduled execution. And each function will have its own URL, executing its own isolated container, and will have its own configurable environment variables and permissions. So let's get started. So for a quick start in here, we need to first of all create a function. So before deploying your function with Git, you need to create a function attached to your Git repository, right? And in your AppWrite console sidebar, click on functions, click on create functions. Under the connect Git repository, you can select a provider. After connecting to GitHub under quick start, you can start with the starter template. The next step is to follow the step-by-step wizard and create a function. Yeah, so let's do that. So in our AppWrite console, the sidebar over here, we search for functions, and we need to create a new function over here. So we can connect our GitHub. Yeah, so I can connect my GitHub to have access to all repositories in here. Yeah, so once I'm connected with GitHub, you can see my repos are pulled over here, and you can see I just made one trial with Node.js 2 days ago. And for a quick start, we need to choose one of these server to work on the Node.js, the Python, that Dino, PHP, Go, right? So I'll go with Node.js in here, and by default, this is how the name is going to be, starter function, and you select the version of the runtime, which I'm going to leave it as Node.js 22, and hit on the next button, and yeah, we allow anyone to execute and also anyone to read information, so you can proceed from here. Deployment, so connect with your Git recommended, or you need to create a new repository over here. So you can clone to a template to a newly created repository in your organization. So I'll go with that one and hit on the next button, and this will create, the repository name is going to be a starter, right? So I already have one repository created known as starter, so this is going to be starter 2, and I can keep it private as well, and click on the next button. So you leave everything as default. The root is going to be default, and click on create in here, and there you go, you have your function create. So once you create a function, you can see the status is processing, then you move to building. So at the building stage, it will build. There you go, you can see function is active, right? So this is the domain you can view, right? So let's move ahead and create our first function, and the first step to do in here is to clone the repository, the AppWrite, created in your repos. So let's do that. Yeah, so in my repository, you can see our starter project in here, starter 2, created by the AppWrite team, and it has everything in it. So I'll click on the code over here and copy that. So I'll bring in my terminal over here and change the directory to be my desktop, and I'll clone this project on my desktop. So git clone, then I'll paste in the link. There we go. So once we have successful cloning of the project, you can see when you list it, you can see our starter 2 project, which is found on the desktop. So I'll drag this project on VS Code and authorize that. Yeah, so this is basically the project, and in the source you can see our main.js file, and the first function in here is they try to initialize the client by setting an endpoint, setting a project, and it is set a project key as well, and get users in here and try to list the users. And finally, they return response.json and passing all this. So to actually see this in working, right? To actually see this working, let's visit the domain of the function we created. So we have domain over here, and once we hit this domain, make a get request with this information, and this information is basically this one. Yeah, so over here, let's start by creating our own user-defined functions, right? So I'll get rid of this sample code over here and start to create our own, right? So our example is going to be logout, right? So logging the user out from with a function method. So over here, we already have our users from the node AppWrite, and when we check within our package.json file under the dependency, we already have the node AppWrite as part of our dependency. So in this try block over here, we already have our users in here passing the clients. So in this try block, we can check for the request method, right? So the request is coming from the function with the structure and getting the request over here. We check for the request method if it's equal to the post request, and at the same time also check for the request path. So we need to pass in the request path, which is going to be request.path. So we check for the path if that's equal to /logout. So if indeed this is true, we proceed logging the user out. And before we do that, we need to get a user ID and also the session ID, right? So we can get out from the request body using request.body.user ID. You can access the user ID, right? Since it's going to be a post request, you are definitely going to get some information passing So we pass our user ID. We need to get our session ID over here as well. That's going to be request.body.session ID. So once we have this, we check to make sure our user ID and also the session ID is available. So if there isn't any user ID or if there isn't any session ID, right, we can return response.json with a message and also the status, right? So the success state is going to be false. And also we pass in a message over here. And the message over here is going to be user ID and also the session ID is required. Yeah, there we go. So if you don't have any of these, we can just return a message. And if we have the user ID and also the session ID, we can proceed to log the user out. So we await, since this is an asynchronous function, we await and call our users variable, and we can call the delete session method on it, right? So users.delete sessions, and in this delete sessions we need to pass in the user ID, and I think you need to pass in the session ID, yeah, the user ID and also the session ID. Yeah, so if we have successful deletion of the session of the user, we can return a JSON with the success state to be true and also the message in here to be user is logged out. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty much simple function to work around. So if you have any error, we can just use the error method to log out the error. So I'll change in the error message over here to be logout failed. Yeah, so basically what we're doing here, let's log the user, right? I'll show you where to find this log in our console. Yeah, so let me explain over here. So basically what we're doing is checking for the request method. If that's equal to a post request and a path is equal to /logout, we get in the user ID and the session ID, check if they exist. If they don't exist, we return this. If they exist, we try and delete the user session with the user ID and the session ID, then finally return a JSON with the state and also the message. So let's try and push this to GitHub, and AppWrite will take that and build a new and deploy a new one for us, right? So I need to make a configuration over here. Let me do that real quick. Yeah, so I'll add that and also make a commit again. I think I already made a commit. Let's see. Yeah, so I need to push this update. So the git push, and that will push the update. So when we visit our console, we should have a new deployment building over here. And here we check and see the status is building, and there we go, it's active, right? So we can check the executions over here. You can see we made 3 executions, and the method in here is going to be yeah. So in our Flutter app, let's bring in our functions, right? So we're going to have functions, then we're going to name it as functions. Then we can pass our client to the functions. Yeah, so once we have our functions here, you can pass that to my app and also require that in the constructor of my app. Then we can finally create our function. So my app now has access to the function. You can pass that down to the home widget, which we are going to use it over there, and we can require that in the constructor of my home page over here. Then you can do same thing by bringing in the functions. There you go. So we'll be adding functionality to the logout method. So we search where we are logging the user out, the functionality. Yeah, there it is. So we'll try to log the user out by calling a function. So I'll comment this out. and this function is going to be, so first of all, I'll bring in my try, and let's try and get the user. So I'll be creating the user variable to hold the user. So to get the user, you can make use of the account, and that's going to be widget.account.get, and this will get you the user. And also let's bring in our session ID. So I'll be creating a variable of sessions, and that's going to be, we're going to await and call our widget.account, then we list all the sessions in for this particular user. Yeah, so once we have access to the user and the sessions, we can try and execute the function by calling the await. Then we can call our widget.functions. Then we can create an execution. So widget.function.create execution, and this expects the function ID. So I'll get a function ID over here. I'll grab this function ID. Yeah, so once we have the function ID, I'll place this function ID in our app configuration. So I'll add that and rename this to be the function ID. So within our create execution method, you need to pass in by calling the appconfig.function ID. And also we can also pass in the path as well. The path is going to be /logout. So let's handle the exception over here. So it's going to be on AppWrite exception. Then we can catch any exception in here. So in here we are basically going to print the exception. Yeah, so there are more things to add to this create execution, right? So it takes in the method, and the method in here is going to be a post method. So execution method.post. So execution method.post. There we go. Then we check whether it's asynchronous as well. Then we pass in the value of true, it's asynchronous. Then we finally pass in the body. So the body here is going to be the user ID and also the session ID. So it's going to be JSON encode that is in the object. So in here we are going to have our users user ID, where we can pass in, we can make reference to our user and access the ID. Same thing happened to the sessions. So with the sessions over here, it's going to be the session ID. Then we can call the sessions.sessions. We list the available sessions and we pick the first one and have access to the ID. So we pass in the user ID and the session ID. Then we pass in the headers in here. So the header is going to be application/JSON. So the content type is going to be application/JSON. So I'll do that in here. So content type is going to be application/JSON. Yeah, and that's basically it. So we make use of the function, create a new execution, pass in the function ID, path, the method, which is going to be the post, is asynchronous as well. Then we pass in the body and pass in the headers, which is going to be application/JSON. So let's give it a try over here. Yeah, so over here I'll try and register a new user with the email, password, and also the name. So I'll go with the email over here as gmail.com. Yeah, so I'll proceed to give my password over here and finally my name and register a new user. There we go. You can see our user is being registered with logged in as. So let's add functionality to log the user out. And before we do that, let's first of all update the logged in user. So I'll grab this code snippet in here, and after successful execution of the function, I'll update the state of the logged in user to be null over here and saving the changes. So once the changes is saved, we can log the user out over here. So when I click on the log out, There we go. We can see the state is changed. So when we visit our executions over here, it's indeed failed over here in making a post request. And when we view the logs, you can see logout failed. And cloud.appwrite, the scope is easiest.write. It doesn't have access to write, right? So let's fix that. I realized we need to create a new server API key. So overview session over here, API keys. I've created one here, so we need to create a new one. And once you have the new one, you need to give it the permission scope. So you come to the sessions. Yeah, so this is the permission scope over here, and you can just choose functions only. So I give the permission scope to be the auth, database, function, storage, and also messaging, and update that. So once you have that update, you can set a key over here to be process.env.secret key. So I place it in the settings, right? So down below over here, when you check the settings, the global variables, I just add one new thing, that's the secret key, then passing the newly created API key. So when we are trying to access it, to automatically pick it from the console, right? So once we have this in place, we can update our function in here by giving it a commit message and also adding the new changes. So once you have that, you can push the new changes in here. Yeah, and when you check the console, you can see our new changes is in the process of building, and once it's ready to attend to active. There we go, as you can see. So let's give it one more trial. So the first logout failed, so let's try and log the user out again. Right, so we already have the user logged in. Let's try and log the user out. There we go. So let's view the console and see the executions. There we go. We have completed one execution. That's the post request. So when we view the logs, the errors, we have nothing. And the logs, I just log the user in here. So that's basically it with the functions of AppWrite with Node.js. See you. And that's the end of the tutorial. Bye bye.